Thank you. You may be seated. Senator the Honorable Auburn Hill, Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, Mrs. Sancia Bennett Templo, a permanent secretary also in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. She'll be joining us shortly. Our Chief Technical Director, Ms. Michelle Parkins, Dr. Serene Joseph, PAHO Advisor, Health Surveillance, Disease Prevention and Control, Dr. Ian Stein. He told me Stein earlier. Stein. Very welcome, sir. PAHO representative for Jamaica, Bermuda, and the Cayman Islands. Dr. Kevin Walker, veterinary specialist with the Veterinary Services Division of the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. Dr. Omar El Hassan, representative, Food and Agriculture Organization. Dr. Patrick Craig, veterinarian with the CB Group of Companies. Mr. Lenworth Clark, inspector, Food Safety Inspectorate with the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. Mrs. Shauna Brandon, rural development specialist with the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. And Mrs. Tamara Moore, senior food storage strategist with the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Division. That's also an agency of the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Members of the media, other special invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to this special forum on the observance of World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. It is observed every year from the 17th through to the 24th of November because what we want to do is to impress upon world populations the importance of antimicrobial resistance, and we're going to be hearing a lot of that this morning. Let me take this opportunity also to specially acknowledge the ladies and gentlemen from Mona High School who is here with us. It's important, ladies and gentlemen, for our students to be aware of this so that in their own interactions, in their communities, in their schools, that they are paying attention to those concerns that become applicable. Minister, you're actually the first person on the program, but let me also, because the minister has to leave shortly, but this forum is intended to do that, and from the 17th through to the 24th, we culminate tomorrow. A series of activities would have been planned, and I hope that you've been taking advantage of the scholarship, of the information that is in the public domain. And though it ends tomorrow, understand that information about antimicrobial resistance is so important, and so that conversation must continue beyond this particular time. Now, incidentally, just on Monday, I was on a discussion. It was actually an Instagram Live with the Honorable Norman Dunn. That's our State Minister in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce as well. And we were speaking about many of the myths that apply as it regards how it is that antimicrobes are dealt with. So, for example, many of us in Jamaica have this 5-second rule that if you are eating something and it falls to the ground, you somehow believe that it's okay for you to pick that up and eat it because the bacteria would not have infected it. They are saying no. And there are so many other myths that are out there that we have to be aware of so that we can be more in tune with keeping ourselves healthy and keeping the environment healthy. And no greater time does that become important than now. The COVID-19 pandemic, if nothing, would have shown us that. So at this time, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to invite the Honorable Minister, Senator Auburn Hill, to come forward. Minister Hill, of course, has the responsibility for leading some 20 agencies in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. That includes organizations such as the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation. There's also the NCRA, among others, many of them having to do with ensuring that concerns of antimicrobial awareness are attended. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we could not have had a more appropriate minister to address us this morning. So please, make him welcome. Minister Hill.
Mr. Darren Miller, or Master of Ceremonies for this morning, my permanent secretary, who might just be walking in, Mrs. Sansia Bennett-Templer, from the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, of course. I see our Chief Technical Director, Ms. Michelle Parkins, here with us. Dr. Serene Joseph, PAHO Advisor, Health Surveillance, Disease Prevention and Control. Good to see you. Dr. Ian Stein. Is it Steen? Stein. I thought Stein. WHO PAHO representative in Jamaica, Bermuda, and the Cayman Islands. Ms. Georgette Thompson, Senior Biochemical Analyst, Veterinary Services Division, Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. Presenters from various entities, media practitioners, ladies and gentlemen. Generally, when I'm at a podium like this, I'm talking about trade and GDP and trade gap and how our economy is growing and how many people are training. But this morning, I'm very pleased to join our colleagues in the Ministry of Health and Wellness, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, and our global development partners and friends to observe World Antimicrobial Resistance Awareness Week. Good to see the young people from Mona, from UWI. I think you're from UWI. Wonderful. Mona High School. Yeah, they did look a little bit young, but you know, I wasn't quite sure. Good to have you all here, because you're going to have to carry the banner for a very long time. The collective efforts that combine annually to concentrate public education on plant, animal, and human health is vital. It will be useful to create a stronger and more sustainable quality infrastructure for Jamaica. And yes, the permanent secretary has just arrived. Welcome, ma'am. Antimicrobials, or AMR as they're known in the business, are essential medicines used to fight disease and infections. Resistance makes common infections harder to treat, increasing the risk of disease, severe illnesses, and even death. This global health and developmental threat requires urgent multi-sectorial action, and my ministry remains committed to leading and supporting strong and sustainable evidence-based solutions. Glad to see the young evidence-based people here so that they can bring the evidence. Look for the evidence. Lots of things will be said, but search for the evidence. The strides we continue to make in manufacturing, agriculture, and the growing productive sector could be severely hampered if efforts are not strengthened to reduce exposure to pathogens such as bacteria or chemical residue along the value chain. And this is important where the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce meet health. You would think that, yes, I should continue to talk about GDP and that kind of stuff, but unless we get the health right, our people won't be able to work. Some of the stuff that we want to export won't be able to export, forget export. Some of the stuff that we want to feed our people won't be acceptable. So it's important that we get the pathogens right and all these health arrangements in place. The sale and consumption of food, for which there are several international guidelines on trade to inform Jamaica's own legislative and regulatory response, is also a top priority item on our protection agenda. The National Compliance and Regulatory Authority, NCRA, the Bureau of Standards of Jamaica, Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation, JANAC, and the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Division are all agencies, some of the 20 of the agencies that Mr. Miller mentioned earlier. Each is charged with specific responsibility to safeguard Jamaica's trading reputation while advancing appropriate safety, sanitation, and hygiene standards across the country, and in some cases overseas as well. And this is the point, ladies and gentlemen, where as a Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce, I get the chance to talk about export. Because JANAC, for instance, Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation, and the BSJ and others, JANAC especially though, serve sell our services from Jamaica, which is an export, to 9 other Caribbean, CARICOM countries, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and so on. So we are helping not just in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean, and we're looking to go further afield. And in that process, we do export, which is, we have an export gap of 4.53 billion US dollars, and we need to get that down. So as you young people train, every time you do something, you say, how much of this can I export? That's the part I get to play for my export for this speech. Now I'll go back to the text that they've given me to deliver. I urge all Jamaicans to take personal responsibility for your health and well-being. Can't say that enough. You must do that for yourself. In fact, Prime Minister Holness, when we lifted the curfew and so on for COVID, said, look, you are responsible. And congrats to Jamaicans. You have taken it seriously, and we haven't had any major fallout from going back to something closer to normalcy. The overuse of antibiotics in humans, livestock, and agricultural produce have accelerated the threat of antimicrobial resistance worldwide. This is often compounded by poor access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has ushered in a renewed sense of urgency for appropriate health and safety standards. We must endeavor to apply these health principles at all times and offer guidance through personal and business interactions. It's very vital that we do that. There are obvious socioeconomic implications worldwide as health systems become burdened, individual income strained, and the productive sector become stagnant. The World Bank estimates that unless action is taken, the rise of AMR could result in global economic damage on par with the 2008 financial crisis. And you know, some people are still hurting from that. The Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce continues to push forward with the education of stakeholders about these serious threats and effective antimicrobials which can be used in the fight against resistance. Our agencies provide conformity assessment services, training and technical support to ensure an alignment with international best practices and consumer safety safeguards. World Antimicrobial Resistance Awareness Week presents a useful opportunity to redouble our efforts. We're working closely with local and international development partners, various ministries, departments and agencies of government to ensure that appropriate safety standards become routine among citizens and our local business community. I urge all Jamaicans to take full advantage of the various events that will unfold today and tomorrow. The global celebration of World Antimicrobial Resistance Awareness Week ends on the 24th of this month, but the work must never stop. There is no excuse to be unprepared. The spread of pathogens that cause infectious disease can be managed. It's up to all of us to use available resources and information to make a strong and lasting impact on antimicrobial resistance. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Minister. Take personal responsibility. I think that is going to be, certainly insofar as Antimicrobial Resistance Awareness Week is concerned, the premier message that all of us have to take a responsibility. It is important for the institutions to be in place to help to lead these particular activities. But if we do not be aware, get the information, then we will not be able to make the kind of inroads that we need to make. And thank you so much, Minister. He has to leave, has another appointment, and that is the nature of the beast in government. But so, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be continuing. And at this time, I'm going to invite Dr. Ian Stein, who is with the World Health Organization, PAHO, a representative for Jamaica, Bermuda, and the Cayman Islands to come at this time with greetings. Please make him welcome.
So, whenever we're here together and colleagues before us have gone through the list of persons here, we use the opportunity to say good morning and recognize that all diplomatic courtesies have been observed, and that's a bit of a shortcut to the long list of people that are in the room. And thank you very much for being here. Good morning. And of course, I also like the call and response so I would say again, good morning as well. Oh, that's terrible. Good morning again. So it is a distinct pleasure to be here with you again, as we were here last year, not in this location, but another one, to talk about antimicrobial resistance, or as we often refer to it in our little circles as AMR. The negative connotation of AMR speaks volumes to the global impact of the problem. However, I also recognize that sometimes when we're talking about these things, we talk at them at a very high level. So I'm hoping at the same time today we'd also talk about them, how we address them in each of our lives. And so I would ask, just to start, while we're talking about AMR, from a personal basis, is there anyone here that could actually talk about a very simple example on how AMR affects their own lives? This is a test. Is anyone? And I think that this is actually a common situation, is we talk about things on this level, but we don't talk about them actually on the very practical level. So allow me to actually take a moment to actually just share the simplest of things, not the exclusive one, because there's many pieces, is unfortunately some of us succumb to an ear infection. A very simple problem. We go to the doctor prescribes an antibiotic. Antibiotic, most of the time, will work. However, this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, is that sometimes those antibiotics don't work. Right? And they have to go to another level, another different antibiotic. Sometimes those work, sometimes they don't. And we have this situation where it's a practical situation where something as innocuous, as simple as an ear infection or other types of infections become more serious to us. And this is a very practical part of what we're talking about. So we're talking about antibiotics, but we're also talking about virals and antivirals. So we have the range of viruses that we have been talking about quite frequently, and also fungi and antifungals. All these issues are susceptible to this challenge that we have on antimicrobial resistance. It's a time today, as with other circumstances, again, to make this a very practical thing, to make this from an obscure thing to something that we actually do need to be mindful of. Because I see that very few people in the room suggest that they are over 100 years old, I would think that none of us were thinking about a virus that could have done what has taken place over the past 3 years. I would share actually from a personal situation, is in late 2019, I found myself in Central Africa on a mission on Ebola. And all of us were very fearful of Ebola and the implications, and thankfully that never made its way into the Caribbean in any form of substance. But when I came back in early 2020, my colleague said to me, "Oh, Ian, I think you might be involved in this new virus that's coming out of China. Have you heard of it?" And I think it's kind of funny that we say, "Have you heard of it now?" This was COVID-19 that was emerging out of China at that time. And I said, "No, I don't think I'll be involved in that. There'll be other people that could be involved." But of course, everyone became involved in this. And so this is, antimicrobial resistance is, as I was saying to Dr. Joseph on our way over here, I was saying it is the sleeping monster, because it is something that if you listen to scientists, if you watch the evidence unfold, if you listen to the policymakers that are trying to address this, it is lurking behind us, and it's a big cause of concern because the solutions, the practical applications and solutions that we have in front of us right now to resolve fungi infections, viral infections, or bacterial infections, all of those are at risk because of the range of interventions that we are using as common practice as a part of day. So as we recognize the far reach of the tentacles of AMR, affecting not only human life, but also animal health and the environment. It's easy to see the connection of human beings directly to AMR when ill and requiring therapy, but may not work because of antimicrobial resistance. But what about the effect of antimicrobial resistance on our four-legged friends? And what about when those are found in the agricultural industry? What about the seepage? This is actually a strange thing we don't talk about very much. The seepage of antimicrobials and pesticides into the environment from the overuse in the agricultural sector and in animal waste, and how often these ignored vehicles, these ignored ways that these chemicals make their way into our food chain, and they could lead to the propagation of antimicrobial resistance. It's not something we talk too much about, but it's a big cause of concern. I do hope that we can make the connection to see how left ignored, these sources of antimicrobial resistance can make their way back to us as humans. And whilst we tend to focus on how AMR makes its way into human population and our health, it's important to reflect on and try to prevent the detrimental effects such a travesty could have in a country such as Jamaica. It was with these thoughts in mind, these huge impacts and the very challenging connections to different sectors, that the One Health approach was put in place and considered the best option to tackle antimicrobial resistance at a global level. And from that, World Antimicrobial Awareness Week was born. And it gives us an opportunity to actually try to raise the consciousness of this matter broadly through communication, education, and training. There are 4 organizations, as we refer to them as the quadripartite. This is actually a great word that I'm not sure if I would use it in any other situation except during this week, the quadripartite organizations that work on One Health. And this together, it's the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, and the United Nations Environment Program. And this year, these organizations together, we developed this strategic framework for collaboration on antimicrobial resistance together for One Health. So for people in the room that want to delve deeper into this is an exceptional document that addresses the breadth of issues at hand. And it actually does an excellent job on dealing with the interdependency of the ecosystem and hence the need for a combined approach to limit antimicrobial resistance. Inherent in the approach is the mobilization of many sectors, disciplines, and communities at all levels of society to work together to tackle threats to health and ecosystems while addressing our collective needs for healthy food, water, energy, and air, taking action on climate change, and promoting sustainable development. The One Health approach seeks to implement programs, policies, legislation, the broad gamut of research within the range of sectors working together for public health outcomes. As the World Health Organization's Regional Office for the Americas, PAHO, is a member of the quadripartite. I try to use that word at least twice in this presentation to try to reinforce my spelling of the word, if nothing else, and also the pronunciation of it. We've played an integral role in the regional work by assisting countries in developing national action plans against antimicrobial resistance, conducting antimicrobial consumption studies to better understand where things are at in surveillance in countries, as well as various surveillance projects as well. These projects have been done in collaboration with the Ministry of Health and Wellness, with the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, as well as the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. And these include workshops, training sessions centered around improving laboratory capacity for detecting and determination of prevalence and distribution of antimicrobial resistance mechanisms, humans and animals. While I go a little bit off script, allow me to also recognize another circumstance in how these things are in the news with not necessarily understanding the connection onto this conversation. The conversations a few weeks ago on the tragic situation that took place in Jubilee Hospital and the death of some young infants. This is a result of possibly a link to these concerns and about antimicrobial resistance, because what we need to do in those circumstances is understand what was the cause of those deaths, and were they, in fact, a situation of antimicrobial resistance. It's a connection between what's in the news and what we're talking about today. PAHO has continuously lent guidance to training and technical support to laboratories across the region, and PAHO has helped the establishment and maintenance of public-private partnerships to promote the responsible use of antimicrobials and legislation to deal with antimicrobial resistance. Work is being supported to strengthen research and innovation on AMR and to seek out alternatives to the use of antibiotics. The COVID-19 pandemic, which we come back to over and over again, it is trying to teach us some important lessons. Amongst others, and there are many for us to learn, is that the things that have a vast impact on the health of a population will definitely have an impact on the population's economy. I'm sorry the minister has left, because this will be the opportunity for him and I to have a little bit of a connection on our eyes on the economy. But given the permanent secretary who is here, we could also have that conversation. But it's well known, at the end of the day, the population's health is the center of the economy. It's the center of development. Ultimately, these effects can lead to vast economic burdens for even the wealthiest countries, as we've seen when supply and demand issues ensue with the reduction of workforce. Food production and food safety are also at risk. And with this in mind, this discussion today serves an important purpose in highlighting how much AMR can affect our everyday lives and what we can do to create solutions together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Doc, for a very comprehensive overview about the importance of antimicrobials, and also ensuring that the proper safeguards are in place for overuse or misuse of antimicrobials. You know, when we're in this space and we look, for example, at the work of the Ministry of Industry and Investment and Commerce and how important regulations become, and you parallel what obtains in other parts of the world. So, for example, individuals may be able to go to a pharmacy and they may be able to purchase antibiotics just off the counter. And that's not something that is best practice, because oftentimes what will happen is that persons will be using it when they perhaps do not need to be using it, and that becomes a challenge. So regulations become so important. And as I thought about regulations, you know, I like to use these little anecdotes because I think they're quite so applicable to life. And I'm particularly pleased to see that our students are here. If nobody appreciates it, I'm hoping you will. So, you know, there's a story told about this particular monkey. And he was deciding that he wanted to travel from the two farthest ends in Jamaica. That's Morant Point and Negril Point. So he got on a JUTC bus. And prior to even getting on the bus, the conductor saw him right at the foot of the stairs. And he had a sign around him, and it was marked, "I understand English." So naturally, you know, the bus conductor was startled, but intrigued. And so they allowed the monkey onto the bus. And as the bus started to make its way from Morant Point to Negril Point, the bus met with an accident. And so when all the paramedics and everybody came around to find out what caused this particular accident, there was nobody to be seen, because everybody on the bus, unfortunately, was dead. All excepting the monkey. So, you know, when they went and they saw the monkey with the sign, "I understand English," they started to question the monkey. Well, he understands, perhaps he can speak. And they asked the monkey, what was going on the bus? Were the people dancing on the bus? And he responded in the affirmative, nodding his head. And were the people drinking on the bus, monkey? And he also responded. So naturally, the only question to ask is, what were you doing on the bus, monkey? And the monkey responded, the monkey was driving the bus. And, you know, regulations are so important. It becomes so applicable to all aspects of our lives. And antimicrobial resistance is no different. So even as we speak about the use of antimicrobials, and there are three classes of them, certainly for public health. We look, for example, at sanitizers, I think they're disinfectants and sterilizers, and we saw how important these were with the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you imagine if in using these sterilizers, it was of no effect at all, and that in creating that cleanliness or that clean space, there was no effect of it because of the kind of resistance that our bodies would have to antimicrobials. So this is important, and certainly how it is that you use antimicrobials become so important. I have some giveaways, and I want for anybody who can tell me one of the quadripartites. The quadripartites. I have my friends from the CB group have some gifts that they'd like to hand out this morning. And anybody who can come right here and just tell me just one. I'm just giving you one. One of the organizations in that quadripartite, I am prepared to give you a nice gift from CB group. And I see a hand at the back right there. What's your name? Could you stand and tell us your name? I want you to come at the front because I want everybody to see you. Please make her welcome as she comes. And Renee, if you could just take the gift along at the same time. The gift is right here. Tell us your name. I see you're from Mona High School,
yes,
and one of the quadripartites.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Wilson, and one of the quadripartites is WHO.
Can you hear her? No. You need to project.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sarah Wilson, and one of them is WHO.
What does WHO mean? I'm sorry, I said one question, but what does it mean? Do you know?
I know what the PH. It's right on the paper. The PAOH stands for.
Okay, you can tell us that one because that's also one.
Representing in the Jamaican Bahamas.
No. So the Pan American Health Organization, but we're gonna still give it to her because it's actually one of the quadripartites. That's the World Health Organization, and you can just come around to the front, and we get a nice picture. CTD, do you mind taking this one for us? I want our CTD in the picture if you don't mind. So sorry. Thank you so much. To just hand this picture. To have this picture with our friend from Mona High School. Very nice. Thank you so very much. And so, ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to be hearing from our keynote speaker. She is Dr. Serene Joseph, and she is a PAHO advisor on health surveillance, disease prevention, and control. So please give complete attention. I'm sure there is a lot of insights that we will glean from her presentation this morning, and I'm so happy to have you here today with us. Please make her welcome.
All right, I think I have to lower this a little bit too. I don't know how to follow a story about a monkey and a giveaway. It's not the best timing for my presentation, but anyway, thank you very much and good morning, honorable ministers and colleagues from the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce and Agriculture and Fisheries, as well as colleagues from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. And I'm very pleased to see all of these wonderful participants from Mona High School. So I'm going to be talking about bringing it on the personal level, as was mentioned by colleagues earlier. I'm going to talk about a topic that all of us can relate to, which is food safety and food security, both on a personal level and on a professional level. So next slide. Next, oh, thank you. Okay, even better. I just need my glasses though. So food safety, what do we mean by food safety? This means guaranteed access to safe, healthy, and sufficient food all year round, fighting foodborne illnesses and ending preventable deaths, and reducing global loss and food waste throughout production and in the supply chain, and achieving safe handling of chemicals. And each one of these different factors related to food safety has a direct impact on the Sustainable Development Goals in terms of zero hunger, good health and well-being, responsible consumption and production, and also looking at, as was mentioned earlier, economic growth, partnerships, and no poverty. So this is really wide-ranging and multi-sectoral. Next slide. Oh, that's me. So in terms of the impact to health, foodborne diseases in the WHO region of the Americas impact 77 million people each year in terms of the number who fall ill. And this disproportionately affects children under the age of 5. So that's 31 million who fall ill under the age of 5 and more than 2,000 who die. And diarrheal diseases are responsible for the majority of foodborne illnesses in the region of the Americas. So without getting into too much detail, it's important to see that overall in all the regions, we see that norovirus is a major contributor to global deaths. But we also see differences when we look at children under 5 again. So we see a little bit more in the Americas, the impact also of E. coli. So these are the top 10 that Woody would have seen on the previous slide as well. But what's really important to note is that we have to be aware and concerned about the potential for antibiotic resistance, so that these causative agents may get to a point and have already gotten to a point where there are treatments that are no longer effective due to their own mechanisms for resistance against treatment. So I won't go into too much detail about AMR, but what I do really want to touch on here, and was also touched on, I think, just right before me by Mr. Miller, was that the misuse or overuse of antimicrobials in humans and the animals. So it's not the use of antimicrobials that's the issue, it's the misuse or overuse that contribute to resistance overall. And unfortunately, disproportionately, this affects lower income countries. So we also have talked about animals. So this picture to me reminds me of when I was 7 years old and I went to India to visit my grandparents from Canada. And my idea of animal interaction was my cat or my friend's dog. It was the first time I saw chickens and chicks just walking around, and I picked them up and I have pictures of me holding them like this. And in my mind, it was very different than my interaction with animals in Canada, but at the time I didn't realize it's all linked, whether it's your pet, whether it's animals for agricultural purposes, whether it's chickens that you're rearing in your backyard, we're all linked together with animals. And this also feeds into the idea of this One Health approach. So this recognizes that the main impact of AMR, antimicrobial resistance, is on human health, but there are very important consequences to the environment, to animals, to economic factors. So we really have to think about working together in human veterinary medicine, in agriculture, finance, environment, and as consumers. So I don't know how well you can see the details of the screen, but I did leave this in because I think it's important to note that AMR is essentially impacts the environment and impacts humans, it impacts animal husbandry, aqua farming, it's everywhere in the environment. So we really need to be aware that what we do in one sector impacts all sectors. So in terms of food production specifically, agriculture and aquaculture practices contribute to waterborne AMR. So there are different pathways, including the use of antimicrobials in livestock, the use of antimicrobials in crops, in irrigation of fields and as fertilizer, so that's for wastewater and sludge, and also in aquaculture, which now supplies more than half of all seafood. So this is really a big part of the economy that we're talking about when we talk about food production. So in the same way that AMR has an impact on human health, that it can also reduce livestock production because it impacts animal health, which leads to loss of livestock. And once again, this disproportionately affects low and middle income countries. So when we think about antimicrobials, I think we often think about the use in ourselves, but actually 70% of all antimicrobials or antibiotics are actually consumed by animals. And what's really important to remember is that there are many antibiotics that are used that are in animals that are medically important for humans, and actually most of them are. So 31 that are used in animals are deemed medically important for humans. And we also have categorizations now of those that are critically important. When looking at the use of antimicrobials in animal production, so this is the use of antibiotics to promote growth in agriculture. Actually, the majority of countries do not use antimicrobials as growth promoters, but when you look at all countries, regardless of use or not use, you'd see that many countries lack legislation and a framework on the use of antimicrobials as growth promoters. And we know that we need this type of policy and legislation to ensure that practices maintain as best practices and sustainable. So here we can see the different countries in terms of whether there are legislations or laws in place that prohibit the use of antibiotics for growth promotion in terrestrial animals. This is information from just this year in 2022. And we see, unfortunately, in the region of the Americas, we see a large proportion of countries that still do not have laws in place. But the positive for Jamaica is that Jamaica is one of the countries that does have this legislation in place. Economic impact. So we've talked about economic impact as well. This can be, as mentioned, as difficult as during a financial crisis. So if you look at the very first graph on the left, your left, then you see that this was what the GDP growth fell during the financial crisis in 2008 to 2009. In this situation, low-income countries actually did comparatively well compared to middle-income and high-income countries. But when we're looking at the impact of AMR, this can substantially reduce GDP even more than in a financial crisis, and this damage can last longer and probably have a hit harder in low-income countries if we're talking about the cost as a percentage of GDP. So at the very last part of the slide, you see the high AMR prediction. This is if current trends continue. So what can we do? So it's not all doom and gloom. So as was mentioned, there's a lot of positives that are happening and have been going on for several years, including what started as the tripartite. I was just getting used to pronouncing that, and now it's the quadripartite. But this is wonderful because this is even more collaboration to bring in the environment into the discussions. So this includes coordinated implementation of global action plans and really working with this One Health approach. So in terms of the Global Action Plan, what I will mention here is just the importance of talking about how resistant bacteria can be found in food, animals, and food products that are destined for human consumption. And again, to emphasize that the bacteria, drug-resistant bacteria, can circulate in humans, animals, and through food, water, and the environment. So there are several lines of action, and these are cross-cutting and affect all of us on a personal level and at a professional level, including the optimized use of antimicrobials, looking at new alternatives for antibiotics and new technologies, thinking about sustainable solutions and those that really can be cost-effective, and really importantly, thinking about awareness and transfer of knowledge and how we can all learn more about what to do and how to work together to combat AMR. So looking at the progress on AMR national action plans, again, this is nice to see the distribution across countries. There's a fair amount of green, which means that national AMR plans are implemented. Even better is the darker green, which are implemented and actually have a monitoring and evaluation framework in place. This is essential to see what we're doing, if we're doing it well, if any adjustments need to be made, and how to move forward and if we're having an impact. Jamaica is at the stage of having an national action AMR plan under development, and we hope very soon to work together to make sure that that turns into a green spot pretty soon. So in terms of food trade, which is an important topic for many here today, talk about sanitary and phytosanitary measures that are in place. So these are all measures from humans to animal to plant health that can directly or indirectly affect international trade. So I will just mention a little bit about the Codex Alimentarius, which has input from 187 member countries and one member organization, which is the EU. And this is an important initiative which is essentially internationally negotiated food standards and norms that guarantee that food that's produced, exported, and imported is safe. Food security is essential, and food trade within countries and between countries we know is a major contribution to food security. So this is an initiative that involves many organizations. There are task forces that were developed in 2006 and 2017 specific to AMR, with the objective to develop scientific guidance on the management of foodborne AMR based on the Global Action Plan of Antimicrobial Resistance, and also the work and standards of the other organizations within the quadripartite. So I won't go into too much detail, but there are specific texts in the Codex on AMR, particularly related to integrated monitoring and surveillance, in terms of minimizing and containing foodborne antimicrobial resistance, and also other relevant texts about good animal feeding, food hygiene, and hygienic practices. So this document for me is an essential document that each one of us working in AMR should be familiar with, that was approved in 2021. And this is about integrated surveillance of antimicrobial resistance. So once again, it's really important that we know we have the data to be able to make evidenced and informed decisions. And this document has the objective to assist governments in the design and implementation of monitoring and surveillance programs on the use of antimicrobials and foodborne AMR throughout the food chain. And although it says WHO on the front of that document, this was done in collaboration with the quadripartite and with input from all Codex members. So that includes Jamaica, which has been a member since 1971. It's also been mentioned about the search for new alternatives. So this is just one scenario where we're looking for alternatives in the poultry industry. But this is a similar strategy that has to take place in every industry, and we have to learn from each other to see what we can do in working together in the different sectors to affect animal health and human health. So this probably looks pretty tiny, but I think what I want to emphasize here is that there is guidance and technical cooperation from all organizations and all of those working in AMR, from the production phase through to trade, surveillance and control, food handling, and as consumers. So again, trying to bring this to the personal level. So every one of us can see ourselves at least at the consumer level, if not in another section of this through our work or through family members or through our day-to-day activities. So just to reemphasize, AMR is a very large public health issue. In 2019, there were more than 4.95 million deaths associated with AMR and 1.27 million attributed to AMR. And currently at the rate and with the trends and with what we do see in terms of antimicrobial resistance in the environment, in humans and in animals, we know that this will continue and could have costs of $300 million to over $100 trillion by 2050. So it's really important that we do think about how to work together to combat this. And unfortunately, COVID, climate change, migration patterns, human displacement have all contributed to the impact and the exacerbation of AMR. We have many challenges which we will be discussing and have been discussing over this week. We do need some data. We do need more official data. We need policies for data and information sharing. We have definitely still needs for risk communication on the topic. But we know that we do have many preventive measures in place in all sectors, from animal ID and traceability to drug registry and control, and looking at alternatives to antibiotics and AMR integrated surveillance. So once again, to bring this back to a tiny slide, unfortunately, but one that's important to capture each of the sectors. So we have healthy ecosystems, healthy animals, and healthy humans, that we can imagine a world where we have this through all the work that we do in the environment, in animals, and in humans, and where we have rural, urban, and mobile communities all working together to communicate, collaborate, and coordinate for a One Health approach. So thank you very much, and thanks again for the invitation to speak today.
Thank you so much again to our keynote speaker, Dr. Serene Joseph, for that very comprehensive presentation. I want us to turn our attention to the screens very quickly. There's a presentation that we will see now, hopefully.
Farming practice.
Food safety is based on science. And I want to also use this opportunity to welcome those persons who are joining us online. There are actually persons watching this stream. Welcome to you. If you're just joining us, we are here at the University of the West Indies' regional headquarters, which is quite so fortuitous because this, ladies and gentlemen, is the home of research and regional integration, and certainly the regional response that we give to antimicrobial resistance will be critical in ensuring that our country makes some serious inroads. We saw the statistics. By 2050, we're looking at some losses of between $300 million to $100 trillion in losses, among other things. I won't go any further because I want to ask another question. I want to give away something else. And that other thing that I'm going to give, again, is from our friends from CB Group. And so I'll ask the gentleman in the red, I'm so sorry I never got your name earlier, also from CB Group, to make this next presentation. Welcome him, please. Thank you so much, sir. And so the question, and it's not just for the students, it's for all of us, because we want to give away a few things. The other question I have to ask, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure if we can get also our online audience involved, is I want for us to name 2 AMR control and preventative measures. 2 antimicrobial resistance, control, and preventative measures. Doc had a very comprehensive list, and I saw our friends from Mona High School taking notes. So did you capture any of that? No? No takers? Doc, do you want to give us 2? I'm putting you on the spot now. You want to turn it back?
Of those who were taking notes.
Right.
Just thinking on a personal level, what is something you could do? If you're feeling sick, what would you do? You go to the doctor, right? Or do you go to a pharmacy and get something without a prescription? Do you follow the advice of the doctor if they say take your antibiotics for 10 days, but you start to feel better after 3 or 4, or you think, oh, maybe I don't need any more? What would you do in these situations?
There's a hand. There's a hand. There's a hand. Yes, let's acknowledge you. Come forward. Please make her welcome, ladies and gentlemen. As you come, just say for us your name and where you're from, and you can go right ahead. And gentlemen, I want to see you involved too.
Good morning. I am Mrs. Jones, and I'm from Mona High School. Now, based on the question that Doc asked, I would go to the doctor, and I need to get a prescription for my antibiotics, and I need to take the full course of my antibiotics. So after a few days, even if I'm feeling well, if it says it's for 14 days, then I need to take it for 14 days.
Good? Okay. The doctor approves. So come around to the front and let's make the presentation. Get a nice photo with you. All right. Thank you so very much. And so now, ladies and gentlemen, we turn to the second segment of this afternoon's proceedings. And right now, we're going to be getting into AMR, implications for trade. And to make this presentation, we have with us a representative from one of our agencies at the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. His name is Mr. Iban Hutton. And his presentation will be on pesticide residues. So please make him welcome, Mr. Iban Hutton. Round of applause,
please. Mr. Darren Miller, moderator. Sansa Bennett Templar, Permanent Secretary, Minister of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Ms. Michelle Parkins, Chief Technical Director, Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. Dr. Serene Joseph, PAHO Advisor. Dr. Ian Steen, WHO PAHO Representative in Jamaica. Other special invited guests, presenters, students, good morning. So I will be digressing a bit from today's topic. I'll be speaking on something else that has an impact on food safety and also on trade. but I don't think that's my presentation. No, it's not my presentation. I'd given them the presentation, so I'm waiting on them.
All right. So, well, perhaps, I mean, in the meantime, while they bring it up, Doc, Mr. Hutton, perhaps you can speak a little bit about the nature of your work at the FSPID. What is the FSPID about? You know, the nature of how it is that the FSPID assists in trade.
Well, okay, the presentation is up. And I will address that somewhat in the presentation as well. So, as we would be aware, contamination with pesticide residues and other chemicals, as well as microbes, bacteria, and fungi, can have serious implications on health and on our export market. What are the implications of MRLs on trade? Now, MRL, that stands for maximum residue limits. That is the limit that certain countries may have on the amount of pesticides that may be allowed in foods. And it may sound funny that there are some amounts that are allowed to be in food. So it's important for our exporters to be aware of these maximum residue limits to avoid import violations, as if these MRLs are exceeded, it can damage a country's reputation, and it can damage the country's market for a particular crop. Because even if a commodity from a certain region or a certain producer is implicated in food poisoning, what has been seen is that consumer, let's say, for example, tomatoes from a certain country are found to have excess pesticide residues. Consumers may just stop buying tomatoes from anywhere in the world. So we have to be careful when we're exporting, that we can damage the country's reputation and also the market for those crops in particular, or those foods in particular. And how do we avoid these MRL violations? Well, for one, we need to know the requirements of the importing country. Don't think that if you're exporting something to the US and the US say their MRL is X, that you can import the same food to another country and assume that they have the same MRL. Each country may have different MRLs, and you would need to know the MRLs for each country before you attempt to export to those countries. Also, each country may have specific pesticide levels that they would allow in certain foods. So not because it's allowed in the US means it's allowed in the UK or another country. So you need to know the specific chemicals or pesticides that may be used on certain crops. And also ensure that when pesticides are used on foods, the label will tell you that there's a withdrawal period. If it's sprayed today, it must not be reaped for a week or two. Those things need to be adhered to in order not to impact trade of certain foods. And just to stress how impactful pesticide residues or pesticide contamination can be, I don't think that many of you would be aware that in 1976, almost 50 years ago, 64 persons in Jamaica, in St. Thomas, became ill after consuming food made with imported counterflour and was accidentally contaminated by parathion. It was imported from, I think it was Europe, and apparently on the ship it was stored next to some pesticide. The flour became contaminated. It ended up in St. Thomas. Persons probably made some nice ackee and saltfish and dumpling, and 64 persons became ill and 17 persons died. So I'm just stressing how important it is to prevent residues, pesticide residues in our foods. So, as Mr. Miller advised, I'm going to speak about what the FSPID does with regard to food safety. We conduct inspections of food and feed areas. We conduct disinfestation operations. We take samples, which we carry back to our 5 laboratories for analysis. So we conduct analyses for contamination in food and also infestation, pest infestation. And we have 5 laboratory units. We have a pesticide residue and mycotoxin unit. Mycotoxins are toxins that are produced by certain species of fungi, which can be very, very dangerous. We also have a microbiology unit. We have an entomology unit, a rodent biology and control unit, and a post-harvest technology unit. But I'm just focusing on, as my presentation is focused on pesticide residues, I'm just going to go into a little bit more about what that unit does. And that unit conducts analyses on fruits, including fruits and vegetables, and also animal feed, to determine if there are any pesticide residues and if there are any mycotoxins in those food. And our microbiology unit, we heard mention of food safety and microbes in food. We have a microbiology unit that conducts analyses for fungi and bacteria in food to ensure that standard requirements are met with regard to microbial contamination. And these laboratory analyses, they are conducted mainly for regulatory purposes, but we also conduct analyses for private customers, including our exporters. And before leaving, I must mention, the FSPID, we were established in 1958. That is 64 years ago. And the regulation, the act and regulation that we were enacted under, the Food Storage and Prevention of Infestation Act and regulations, are pretty old. The act was enacted in 1958, the regulations in 1973. So you can understand, it was a bit outdated. So in 2019, it was updated, and the updates include stipulations as to how food is to be stored to mitigate against contamination, and in particular, contamination from chemicals. So it speaks about not storing food next to chemicals unless there's an impermeable partition, and transport of food to prevent contamination as well. So our exporters or food businesses need to get a copy of this act and regulation to know what needs to be done, and also other pieces of relevant legislation. And at the end of the day, what do we want? We want safe and wholesome food, and we want increased access to international markets. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause, please, for Mr. Hutton. As I listened, Mr. Hutton, I thought back to the Hope Valley watershed and the work that I know the Ministry of Agriculture is doing to train farmers in that particular area about how it is that they go about pesticide control, because quite a large percentage of the water that we get here in the Kingston metropolitan area actually streams from the Kingston and Hope Valley watershed down into our main. And so certainly how it is that they go about treating their agricultural produce becomes so critical so as not to cause the kind of contamination. And naturally, if it is contaminated, the implications that it will have for the citizens who consume that water. So this is quite so important, and I thank you for giving that very comprehensive presentation. MLR. It's MRL? Well, me get it wrong now. What does MRL mean? Any takers? Okay, I saw your hand first. No, you have to come again. Tell us your name, where you're from, and what does MRL mean? Round of applause for her as she comes. And I don't understand, gentlemen. Why are the gentlemen not participating? The next question must come from one of you. All right?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Corianne Anderson. I'm from the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. It's a mouthful. And MRL, maximum residual limit.
Wonderful. Round of applause for you. And please, may I ask you to make this presentation? And it's quite so appropriate. Go around to the front, the BSJ, one of our agencies as well in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. so much. Thank you so much, PS. All right, and so now we turn to our next presentation, and this one will be done by Mr. Lenworth Clark. We're still under the section on implications for trade. So how do antimicrobials interact in this particular question of trade? His presentation is going to focus somewhat on that. He's an inspector with the Food Safety Inspectorate of the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. Please make him welcome.
Morning, everyone. All protocol observed. It's good to be here, seeing familiar faces from the College of Agriculture, Science and Education. You know, everywhere I go, I will speak about case. Dr. Craig, it's good seeing you. Madam, singing lady. Sorry, just brings back memories when I usually attend case. I'm here this morning to give a presentation as it relates to the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. My colleague a while ago just got a present, and you may be wondering, what is this agency about? I will tell you. So, you might be familiar with the Bureau of Standards Jamaica. Well, the Bureau of Standards Jamaica, its regulatory division, is now the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. So all the regulatory functions previously conducted by the BSJ is now being conducted by the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. How did the change came about? It came about through an instrument of authority, and that was dated back from the 29th day of December 2015. So we are a fairly new entity, and I ensure that at every one of our presentation that we ensure that persons know about the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. You probably still hear, whenever we conduct our inspections, you might hear, we're inspectors from Bureau of Standards, but the new entity. And the reason why we still have to use the BSJ's regulations is because the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority Act is not yet in being, but hopefully the PS is here that next year. Okay, good. Okay, so yes, we are a statutory body and we fall under the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, and these are legislations that we use: the Standards Act, the Processed Food Act, and the Weights and Measures Act. We have, sorry about that, we have 3 inspectorates, which the Food Safety Inspectorate, the Import and Domestic Commodities Inspectorate, and the Legal Metrology and Petroleum Inspectorate. I am from the Food Safety Inspectorate, and that speaks about what we do. Food safety. We want to ensure that when persons consume food, it is safe. Our duties. Our duties include, just like our friends from FSPID, to conduct inspections, both in the domestic market and at the ports of entry. We do issue certificates, certificate of for establishments, certificate of approval, certificate of quality, certificate of free sales, etc. We do collect and also send products or samples to our labs, and the others like the testing and certification of weighing and measuring devices that is used in trade. Also, we analyze the test results and we, as I mentioned earlier, certify some amount of products. We look at labels, yes, so all prepackaged goods that are in Jamaica, whether it be manufactured here in Jamaica or it's being imported, we are the agency that has the responsibility to verify or examine those product labels. And you can see as we go on what other stuff that we do at the National Compliance and Regulatory Authority. Other duties including like these, we do public education, and we assist in setting standards basically on our technical committees that we have. So if there's a standard that is being developed or any form of regulation that is being developed, or legislation I should say, then we participate in such. As it relates to the antimicrobial or even pesticide residue, the legislations that we'll use, and I must pause here to say that our legislations are not specific. They are broad, but they will cover if needs be. And it's the Jamaican Standard Specification for Processed Food General. This is one that we use, and we also use the Jamaican Standard Specification for the labeling of prepackaged food, and we can also use the Jamaican Standard Labeling of Processed Food Regulation of 1974. I'll just get into the sections that we use. So, all processed food shall be fit for human consumption. And any poisonous or harmful substance, it should not have any of those. And it shall not contain any form of diseased or objectionable substance. So if you have any of these in your product, like the pesticide residue, we can actually take action against your product. Also, if we get your products and your raw material has it inside it, we can also take action against it, because all raw material should be wholesome. Whether it be imported or it be locally manufactured or distributed, it must meet the requirements of the JS36. Labeling. Some persons generally has put on their products that it is free of antimicrobial substance, and if you so do, you may find yourself in trouble, because if we test your products and we find it inside of it, then we can actually take action against you under the standard specification or labels, because this time it will be false, or it will be misleading, or it will be deceptive labeling, because that should not have any erroneous impression on your labels. Also, persons might put symbols saying that the words are not there, but even if you put it there, we can also take action, because this might lead to some confusion to the consumer, and that is prohibited under the standard specification, labeling one in particular. Persons might use words or phrases that again might be misleading or confusing to the consumer. That is also prohibited. Even though pictorial presentation is optional, you must ensure that any pictorial presentation you have on your label is not in conflict with the requirements of the Jamaican Standard Specification for processed food. We also have our labeling regulation under the Standards Act, which you use. And this, again, it just tells you that the label should not be misleading, or it should not be deceptive. What are some of the enforcement actions if we see any one of these legislation being breached? We can withdraw your product from sale, we can detain or seize your product, and we can actually condemn your product. The fine of $3 million is not really within our purview at the agency. We'll hand that over now to the ministry to take care of that. And again, you can get you can be in prison for 12 months or both. You can also have, this is what we can do at this agency. So we can withhold your certificate of registration. We can refuse to grant you a certificate of approval. You can get denial for the certificate of free sale, certificate of health, or certificate of hygiene. Again, I will pause here to say, what are these certificates of free sale? Some countries that you export to requires a certificate of free sale. Just for us to write that this product is sold freely in Jamaica, or they probably ask you for a certificate of health or a certificate of hygiene, just to say that this product was produced in a processing plant that is registered with us. And this nice one that I put here, your establishment is not placed on our list of registered company that is posted on our website. And you might take it trivial, but persons do contact us to find out the organizations or the establishment that are registered. I might say with the Bureau, but registered with us. The implication, I think most persons will know the implication: loss of productive hours, loss of revenue, loss of market access, and that is both locally and internationally. Again, lower exportation of manufactured products, because if you do not get your certificate of free sale, or your product is above the required limits, then you find that you cannot export. It might have a hit on your reputation as an organization. Consumers will lose their confidence in you. You might have to do product recall. You might have some amount of litigating cost, and then persons might lose their jobs, and you might have destruction or disposal of your food. But what are we doing at the NCRA? We will continue to conduct our inspection and monitoring of food processing establishment. We'll continue to examine labels for compliance. We will continue to take our samples for testing, and we will continue to keep up our strong enforcement actions or program. We will advocate for updates of legislation so that it can be relevant, and we'll continue to do public education as this or any other participation. And we will refer clients or any customer to any organization that will provide guidance. And one of them, and might be biased here, is the BSJ Client Services Program. They will assist you as manufacturers if you're getting into manufacture, and provide some amount of guidance in terms of what the legislation speaks about. Because again, one of the main reasons for a separation is that we cannot guide you and then regulate you. It will be a conflict of interest. Well, that's pretty much it for me here today. We are located, our head office is located at 19 Hope Road. You can also use the BSJ's gate at 6 Winchester Road, but we also have regional offices in Montego Bay, Mandeville, Ochi, Savannah, Lamar. And you can also visit what we consider as our library, but the correct name for it is the Dr. Hartnell Henry Standards and Technical Information Center. We are also, you might visit our website, www.ncra.org.jm, or you can email us, info@ncra.org.jm. You can WhatsApp us, you see it there. Yeah, we are on Facebook, we are on LinkedIn, we are on Instagram, and we are also on Twitter. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Clark. Very comprehensive. And I can tell you, absolutely, and I can tell you, if there's anything with organizations today in government, is that you will never not understand what they do, because it is said in the name. Always said in the name, and very clear. And that is what we want for persons to know about the various spaces where they can get information, and also where they can report, because I'd imagine, Mr. Clark, that there is a mechanism for persons, citizens, to get involved. And when they see certain breaches, probably, there are avenues for that as well. So again, we want to thank you so much for your presentation this morning, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. I see a hand being raised. I didn't ask a question, but I see one being raised. Yeah. Go ahead. Yes. Oh, you're asking a question, sure.
For example, baked goods. A part of the monitoring
Right. So just repeat the question for those online.
All right, then. So she's asking, she gave an example as to where we'll get the samples from, correct? Yes. All right. So we get our samples from the food establishment. So when we're conducting our inspection, part of our inspections is to take samples. All right. So we also have the Import and Domestic Commodities Inspectorate that they are at the ports of entry. They also take samples. And we also check the marketplace, whether it be a retail outlet, whether it be any one of the retail outlets, supermarkets, wholesale. They are selling at the school gate. If they are in the rural areas, we can go get the samples and take it in for testing. And what we do too is to provide a feedback to the client and how their product perform. And the possibility tell them if there are going to be an enforcement action, yes or no. All right, I trust that has answered your question. All right, then great, thank you.
I love to see the interest and the interaction, because this is what this is really all about. We want to get persons involved. I want to acknowledge Dr. Elizabeth Johnson. Could you just raise your hand for me, please, Dr. Johnson? Dr. Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the Jamaican representative from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. So good to have you here this morning with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be moving right along. Just a slight adjustment to the program. We would have had the coffee break, but we need to move along just to facilitate some other some other matters that we need to get done in quick succession. So I'm just going to make that slight adjustment for coffee break, which will take closer to the end or at the end. And then at this time, we're going to invite for greetings Dr. Kevin C. Walker, who is a veterinary specialist with the Veterinary Services Division of the ministry. And I'm being told that he's not here. So the Director of Vet Services will actually make the presentation. Please, at this time, make him welcome, or her welcome. Him. Where? I didn't see somebody standing, so I was wondering. Thank you so much, sir. Please come right ahead. I hope I didn't catch you by surprise.
Kind of.
You weren't well under pressure.
Morning, everyone. PS in the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. I see CTD in the Ministry of Investment and Commerce, representative of PAHO, other dignitaries, colleagues, friends. I see a whole lot of friends from the Caribbean Brothers Group, and our friends from other entities. I see my colleagues from the Veterinary Services Division, our students and future scientists from is it the Mona Prep? Primary? High? Mona High. Okay, all right. Okay, a very pleasant morning. So AMR, antimicrobial resistance, as we are aware, is a global threat, and at this time every year we celebrate, or we actually try to highlight activities relating to AMR by hosting a World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. The theme for this year is preventing antimicrobial resistance together. I'm very happy for the wide cross-section of participants what I've seen here today. And it shows that in keeping with the theme, preventing antimicrobial resistance together, we are getting there. So it's the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, it's the Ministry of Health, it's the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, it's NEPA, it's the private sector, it's the farmers, it's the medical doctors, it's the veterinarians, it's the animal health technicians, it's the public health inspectors, all of us It's the NSWMA, if there's such a it's still an entity, right? NSWMA, yes. Or right, yeah, or solid waste people. All of the persons involved in health, in environment, and pretty much those persons who would actually be in the field of research also. So we are all aware that animal health, human health, and environmental health are intricately and intrinsically linked. They are intertwined and they are interdependent. And it is a fact that we, and when I say we, I mean humans and animals, share our land space together and share our resources together. And in doing so, we also share pathogens. We know that more than 60% of pathogens that cause human illnesses originate from either domestic animals or from wildlife. Yes. We know that sometimes dangerous strains of resistant microbes spread between and among animals, humans, and plants. We are all aware that antimicrobial resistance has become one of the greatest global health challenges of our time, and it is becoming one of the leading causes of death. And our colleague from PAHO would have indicated some of the real threat that we face in that area. It is a threat to animal and human health, as well as livelihoods and food security worldwide. So worldwide, approximately 1.3 billion people rely on livestock for their living. And perhaps a further 20 million or so rely on aquaculture for their living. And in doing so, they provide us with the food we need. So what if AMR should impact these groups in such a way that they are unable to provide the food for us? So the responsible use of antimicrobials and proper disposal of unused and expired antimicrobials ensure that we safeguard the environment as much as possible and reduce risk of development of resistant microbes. In the field of veterinary medicine in Jamaica, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, through its Veterinary Service Division, has been working with our stakeholders over the years, including farmers, veterinarians, animal health technicians, and our public health experts, to prevent diseases in animals at various levels through vaccination programs, through the implementation of relevant measures such as disease surveillance. We work with our farming community, work with the suppliers of services and also veterinary supplies to the farming sector to ensure that we adhere to the principle of prudent use. And yes, the expert from PAHO is correct. In Jamaica, we have moved away from using antimicrobials as growth promoters. And I know that we have moved away also from using hormones. So some of the labels that you see is correct when they say hormone-free. Yes, we can also say with them it is hormone-free because we say to them, whether it's going to be CB or JB, yes, we support you. We know that you're not using these things. Now, fighting antimicrobial resistance is a global issue and must be addressed through a One Health approach. And I'm happy that we've gathered here like this, and it shows that in Jamaica, and I'm sure that PAHO would be very happy about it, to see the level of involvement of the various sectors. We have the private sector, we have MIC, we have MOA. And it shows, it's a good sign for Jamaica that we are getting to the point where everyone now really understands the impact of the whole phenomenon of AMR and how we can work together to do our part to reduce the impact, the negative impact it will have on our populace. So I thank you for having us, and I hope that the rest of your day will be as successful as it has been going since this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Watson. We are moving right along, and at this time we're going to be having some messages from our partners. Of course, none of this could be possible had it not been for some very critical partners who have come on board to assist us this morning. I'm going to ask them to come in this order, just one after the other. First of all, we're starting with Dr. Patrick Craig, who is a veterinarian with the CB Group, to be followed by Mrs. Shauna Brandon, a rural development specialist with the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. She's the project liaison. So in that order, both persons, your messages. Thank you. Welcome. Welcome them.
Thank you very much. Right, so moving right along. So good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody here and with all protocols observed. I know the permanent secretary, well, not the permanent, the minister has left, so PS, lovely folks from the CB Group, thank you very much for being here. The students, I like seeing students everywhere I go because I consider you the future, the next generation. I was once in your position. I have a little presentation, hope. I don't know if we can get through it very quickly. If we could just start at the beginning, please, if that's possible. Right, so we're stressed for time, so we're not going to really have much time to actually go through this. But antimicrobials, that's what basically we're talking about today. And there's usually a misconception. A lot of people tend to use them interchangeably, antibiotics and antimicrobial. The difference between them is that all antibiotics are antimicrobials, but not all antimicrobials are antibiotics. They are antivirals, they are antiparasitic agents that we use, antifungals. So we have problems with all of these four major classes that I have mentioned right here. They have their mechanism, how they work. I won't get through that for interest of time. How the antibiotics actually work to get rid of all of these parasites that we are having problems with out there. And obviously the parasites are going to develop new ways of combating and trying to get rid of the antibiotics. They can use ways of, they can have new cell processes. They could destroy the antibiotics using enzymes. They could change the targets. They could use pumps to actually get rid of these antibiotics. So we're seeing a major problem. Viruses, obviously, they use their mutation and genetic mutations and different mechanisms to actually get rid of all of these problems. And we see a major issue going on right here. And this doesn't really happen only for bacteria. It happens for parasites also. So we see a population of, I don't know if we have a pointer, but we see a population of microorganisms in both blue and red. The blue ones obviously are sensitive bacteria. Those antibiotics can actually kill. The red ones, we can't really get rid of them. So they're in the stomach, they're wherever they are inside the human and the animal body. And once we throw some antibiotics or we throw some antifungal or whatever we throw at that, antimicrobials, we tend to get rid of the sensitive ones. And what happens? We leave the ones that antibiotics or antimicrobials cannot get rid of. Those start to replicate, they start to multiply, they move from animals, to humans, from humans to animals. And so we have this problem where we get to that stage where we only have pathogens that are not really sensitive to anything. So we keep throwing medications at them and nothing really happens. Excuse me. So we tend to lose, lots of animals, lots of human beings. If you look at the great United States where medication are in excess, in Jamaica we have very few classes of antibiotics or antimicrobials that we can use. They've had, serious problems with loss of lives linked generally to this resistant problem. And I just want to touch briefly on what the Europeans are doing. They've now have 4 different classes. There are class A, B, C, D. They're classes that antibiotics or antimicrobials that we need to avoid. Those that are restricted. Those that they put caution on. We can use them if needs be. And they're then classes for prudent use, obviously for first line, which we can actually use. And so I don't know if Jamaica has regulations for this particular issue. In Europe, you really have to have paperwork done, talk to people, agencies, on whether or not you can actually use a certain antimicrobial in treatment of animals. And this is basically what we do as veterinarians, as doctors, as dentists. We are the only 3 classes of people who have the right to prescribe antimicrobials or antibiotics. And what I want to stress also is that we can, what we ask our good folks and colleagues to do is to basically do some form of diagnostic testing before we actually throw antibiotics at animals or human beings. And what we find in Jamaica is that we're having a major problem where we can get all our antibiotics over the counter. We don't need to prescribe anything because farmers are finding new ways of getting antibiotics. They're smuggling that in their suitcases. They are getting it at the farm stores. Unscrupulous persons are giving them prescriptions somewhere else to actually get it. And so they have it. It's only a few days ago, a farmer came to our organization wanting to buy 750 milliliters of a particular antibiotic to use on his pig farm. Obviously, nobody needs 750 ml of antibiotics when you're using maybe 5 or so per animal. And so we're having major problems with that, especially in Jamaica at the time being. And some of the things that we ask our farmers to do, we ask, I speak for farmers because I'm a vet, that there are alternatives out there. We don't need to actually jump into the use of antimicrobials all the time. We recommend, biosecurity measures. We do that all the time. We travel the whole country, the Caribbean. This is what we basically recommend. Feeding programs, nutrition, reduce overcrowding. We talk about, people growing pigs, chickens, cramping them in a small area and then having all sorts of problems and trying to use antimicrobials to treat their bad management. So these are some of the problems that we face out there. And so we encourage, we do encourage the use of vaccination. I know Jamaicans in a whole, we really have a problem when it comes on to vaccines. We don't trust vaccines. We believe that the government is trying to control us, trying to control our animals. They're putting microchips in us. It's a major problem. So we try and educate our farmers as best as possible to use other alternatives to actually try and get out of these notions of throwing antibiotics or antimicrobials at every single thing that we see happening on our farms. There are other things that we talk about, and this is a simple graph when it comes on to feeding piglets. And let me explain what it means in very, very brief right here. If we look at the pre-starter period, these are piglets that are maybe from 1 to 4 weeks old. We are trying to feed them the same feed that we are feeding our adult animals. And at that very tender age, which is a very critical point in the life cycle of these animals, they don't really have the enzymes to digest the feed that their mothers are eating. So we buy one type of feed and we feed it to the mothers, the babies, everybody on the farm. And so we are asking farmers to, think critically. We have a specialized feed for baby animals. We throw, a cheaper feed that we feed our older animals at these babies, and they don't really have the enzyme to digest that. They end up having scours, and then we throw antibiotics at them to actually, control that. And we really know that throwing antibiotics at scours is not really the way to go. If animals are losing water at the back end, having diarrhea, serious problems with diarrhea, we lose maybe 90% of these animals all the time because they die from dehydration and not because of the activity of bacteria. When we look at ruminants, goats and sheep and cows, when we feed them, we don't really actually feed these animals. We're feeding their bacteria. The bacteria inside them is needed to break down all the nutrients, to break down the grass. And when we throw antibiotics at them, we're actually killing off lots of these good bacteria. And when we kill off these bacteria, what happens next? It takes at least 7 to 10 days for that microflora to actually replenish itself. And during that time, animals will be having scours, diarrhea, and we're losing them. And then we throw antimicrobials at them again. And what are we doing when we throw antimicrobials at them? We're actually killing off the little bacteria they have left, the one that they're trying to replenish. We are killing them further, and then we lose the animals. So the more antibiotics we throw, the faster we kill our animals, and we really don't know why they're dying. And then when people call me and they ask critical questions and you try to explain this to them, they really tell us things like, I've been doing this for 40 years and, you're a young guy. So we really get stuff like that. It's very difficult. The educational level is not there. So we're trying as best as possible to enforce that. And, I have a little slide right here with weaning stress and gut health. We wean our animals too early. We take them from their mothers. That in itself is a problem. Animals are not really ready at that critical point to leave their mothers. Then we throw hard feed at them at a point where they should be getting milk and milk-based diet. And then that in itself will cause all sorts of stresses, all sorts of problems, leaky gut. There's a lot of bad bacteria within the intestine itself. Every time we get any form of stressors, early weaning, heat stress, and we know in Jamaica, if you're, there's really nowhere you can find where you'll find temperatures less than 25 degrees where we have animals. It's pretty hot out there. And once animals are exposed to heat stress, we start getting leaky gut, we start getting all sorts of hormonal changes. Bacteria start to move from where the immune system would have been controlling them under normal circumstances to start causing diseases. And then we end up with problems of farmers throwing antibiotics at these animals, trying to control something that antibiotics or antimicrobials obviously cannot control. And so we see problems like, even with our chicken, the chicken industry, we're having a major problem with that, where farmers can get antibiotics over the counter, very cheap, and they throw it at chickens. I've seen that particular cow in recent times where the farmer was trying to treat that animal, obviously, and sadly she ended up dying. Throwing antibiotics at her didn't help, and by the time I got there, it was really too late, and the animal died a few days later. So we're seeing major problems. These are things that could have been treated earlier, with intervention, by calling the vet very early, doing the right thing, and not trying to treat or self-treat. Because all farmers in Jamaica today are their own vets. They only call vets when it gets to the point where it's so critical, it's too late. And so some of the things that we are asking people to do, and with the responsible use of antimicrobials, is to only prescribe antibiotics. And these are things that you should be telling me. Only prescribe antibiotics when they're necessary. Not try to go and get your own antibiotics, because Jamaica is a place like that where you can buy anything you want, when you want. It's prescription only, but you can buy it without a prescription. Sadly, you can. Reduce prophylactic use of antibiotics or antimicrobials. We're using that a lot. I've seen people walk into our organization trying prophylactic use, which means if your animal is not sick, you want to prevent them from becoming sick, so you actually give them antimicrobials or give them antibiotics. Yes, so we have seen people who walk in and ask, can we get X amount of antibiotics for what? Just in case, or to give my animals so they don't become sick. So we see that happens a lot. It might sound silly. You walk to your doctor, your general practitioner, and say, I don't want my baby to get sick next week, so can you give me some antibiotics or some antiviral or something to give my child so she won't become sick? This is what we face and grapple with in the veterinary community. And because people have access to all these drugs, they just buy them, and farm store people are doing business. So if you walk into me, I will sell it to you because I'm doing business. So, we have these problems. Offer some form of alternative methods, biosecurity, feed management, something along that line. Treat effectively. Finish the course. I think you spoke about that at Lens. If you get antibiotics for 10 days, and for human beings it's a little bit different, but I do know people who get antibiotics for 10 days and only take it for 2 days, and they just leave the rest for somebody else who may become sick in the future. But for animals, I know for farmers in particular, you'll tell them that this is how long you should give this particular medication, and they'll do it for a few days. They don't have the time. They just leave it. The animal might get better, may not get better, and later down the line, the animal may die, or more animals will die. Employ narrow spectrum, and to do that, you must do culture and sensitivity. We have very few people in Jamaica doing that today, so it might become somewhat of a problem. A lot of vets are not really going out to take samples, bring it to the lab, wait for the test result. That might take a week. In that time, the animal could be dead, so they throw antibiotics at it. Sometimes they throw many different types of antimicrobials, leave it with the farmers, and the farmers try to do it themselves, and they can't do it. Have a policy and follow it. So, write a plan, have a policy, follow it. Educate people, educate farmers, educate them on the proper use of antimicrobial, because they do not know. They rely on us all the time to actually, give them that knowledge. But there are many factors out there. There are many farmers out there who, they know it themselves, quote unquote, know it themselves. They don't want your education. All they want the antibiotics. Just sell the antibiotics to me. Give it to me. I'll do it myself. I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for a very long time. So, there are unscrupulous vets out there. I will not speak for the doctors and the dentists. I'm in that group. There are unscrupulous vets out there who will go around, and when I say I mean that group of vets. There are unscrupulous vets out there who will go behind and they write prescriptions illegally. They will just sell stuff under the counter. They will prescribe stuff that has nothing to do with what the animal has. You know, somebody will call you on the phone and say, my animal is sick, and you just send him to buy something because you know that they can get it without a prescription. And so we need to tighten that up. And the Director of Veterinary Services is sitting right there. You know, it's a good thing that he's right there. So, you know, legislations can be made moving into the future, tightening up, you know, that line when it comes on to people getting medication, Ministry of Health. We're having a serious problem, and the bigger part of that problem is coming from the veterinarians, I believe, in my opinion, because we're the one prescribing most of the antimicrobials out there, or not prescribing, just giving it to everybody who wants it. So I really think we need to do more on that and take that forward. And I'm really happy that the students are here so that when they become the next set of professionals, vets, doctors, dentists, they would already know what we're facing. So they wouldn't, you know, jump into that not knowing exactly what to do. So it was a little bit rushed. I wish I had more time to explain it in full detail, but
I have a question. Are there any alternatives for antibiotics?
there are many alternatives. Antibiotics are a last resort, and most of the times, maybe 90 or more percent of the time, what we throw antibiotics at are really not necessary. We recommend feeding programs. Once you feed your animals properly, that will enable animals to have a good immune system. If the immune system is working, the immune system will actually keep microorganisms that you know, animals or human beings will be healthy. Biosecurity is another one. And what does biosecurity mean? Bioorganisms and security. We're trying to keep out microbes, keep out wild animals. If we talk about chickens, for example, if you're growing broiler chickens, which is the white one for meat, you really don't want to have layers close to them. You don't really want to have wild birds, ducks, because all these animals will have different type of, you know, pathogens that will affect them. So you really don't want to have all of this in one melting pot together that will, you know, pose further challenges down the road. What we're doing in Jamaica and Caribbean right now, or maybe the world, in the wider world, we're having everybody in one melting pot, and when we have problems, we throw antimicrobials at it to try and fix what I like to call bad management. So a lot of farmers are trying to treat away their problems using antimicrobials, when antimicrobials really have no impact on really what's going on in those particular animals. So there's a long list of choices that you can choose, and in my opinion, and using antibiotics is really at the very, very end as a last resort.
And we're giving him a bang for his question.
So that is really my last slide. If there are any other questions, I'll take them. If not, thank you very much for your time.
What would you use, or do you use steroids? Do you use steroids? And what? I have a bad knee. Sorry, I can't.
Okay, you can sit.
Yeah. Do you use steroids? What do you use steroids for animals?
So steroids are used. They are used mainly in, you know, the horse racing. Guys would use steroids to some extent. We can use it if animals are having some form of infection as anti-inflammatory, but on a wide scale, no, we don't use it that much. In small animal world, yes. In the equine world, we will use it. For food animals, we don't really use it any at all. I don't know if there are certain restrictions on the use of steroids. But let me ask, when you said steroids, are you talking about like for anti-inflammatory, or are you talking about steroids for enhancement of performance?
Both.
No. For enhancement of performance, no. But there are corticosteroids that we do use as anti-inflammatory in animals, small animals, in equines. That's all we use it for. But there are no performance enhancement or enhancing drug use in terms of steroids.
No, just a quick second. So sorry. I'm so very sorry. But thank you.
May I just close off just one in relation to the same question here, and it's a good question that was raised in relation to steroids. And Jamaica has been very strong against the use of these things as growth promoters. There is a product, for example, Zeranol, I think it was used in relation to implants in North America to really grow cattle fast. We do not use it here. And there are others. There was in the recent past a request for the use of, I think it was bovine somatotropic hormone or something to enhance milk production. We said no. So therefore we are on top of the game, and we work with the industry to make sure that we try to keep the Jamaican public healthy.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you so very much. I'm so sorry to have to rush you like this, but we really have to go. We're pressed for time. And so I'm going to ask that for our next presenter, that we make it very tight and that we put the questions toward the end. So there will be an opportunity for questions at the end once we would have closed this segment. All right? Thank you so much again. So we're welcoming now Mrs. Shauna Brandon, and she's Rural Development Specialist with the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. She's a project liaison. Please make her welcome.
Good morning. I'm going to try and be quick. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, good morning. So, ICA, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture, is happy to partner with the various entities here, the Ministries of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, Health and Wellness, PAHO, FAO, in observing World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. I'm so happy that I am coming after Dr. Craig, because ICA today wants to highlight the importance of surveillance systems to support the control of antimicrobial resistance, particularly in our food trade. Because as you would have seen from Dr. Craig's presentation, even when you have the regulations in place, things that should not happen may or do occur. And it is with surveillance actions and systems that you can find out what is happening and how it is impacting issues such as AMR. Also, a lot of the entities that have presented here, FSPID, NCRA, the Veterinary Services Division, all conduct surveillance actions, because that is how they're able to monitor the food trade and ensure or assist to ensure that food safety is maintained in the food chain. So surveillance is one of the tools that must be deployed to determine the potential presence of disease-causing microbes in the food chain that have acquired antimicrobial resistance. And based on the data obtained from surveillance actions, the authorities can plan and execute necessary corrective actions. In addition to protecting our national food supply chain, surveillance systems to monitor antimicrobial resistance also help to strengthen our capacities to trade, as it enables the country to identify weak points along the food chain that must be corrected to prevent or reduce the likelihood of resistance pathogens entering the food chain. Surveillance actions in the food supply chain involve the collection, analysis, and reporting of data on selected microbes that cause disease. This allows early detection and understanding of the potential buildup of drug resistance among microbes that can impact our health through the food we eat, and is one of the best ways to prevent antimicrobial resistance. If we do not monitor, if we do not test, we will not know whether drug resistance is occurring or the extent to which it is occurring in Jamaica. As we would have seen from the previous presentations, the World Health Organization has described antimicrobial resistance as a global health and development threat. And as we should have learned from the COVID-19 pandemic, health crises impact all facets of life. And as we sit here by this event organized by the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, we must keenly recognize the potential impact on our local economy, trade, and tourism, especially since our food supply chain, the common denominator for the success of all three facets of our livelihoods, is vulnerable to the buildup of antimicrobial resistance. Given this awareness, ECO has been collaborating with the Ministries of Agriculture and Health to finalize an antimicrobial monitoring program for the livestock sector in Jamaica. And was previously mentioned by Dr. Watson, 60% of all human diseases originate from animals. It also was noted earlier that Dr. Joseph from PAHO, that several of the chemical agents and drugs used to treat infection in animals are the same as those used for humans. Thus, monitoring food of animal origin for drug-resistant pathogens is critical to the fight against AMR. The draft surveillance plan for the Jamaican livestock sector, which to date has the acronym JARMS, J-A-R-M-S, proposes a systematic, coordinated, and continuous program to collect and test animal and meat samples at critical points in the food chain. It recommends the use of international methodologies and standards for data collection such that the information is comparable at regional and international levels. Successful execution of the JARMS will require resources and the coordinated involvement of various arms of government, awareness raising with concomitant action in the private sector. This is in keeping with the theme for World Antimicrobial Week, preventing antimicrobial resistance together. I also want to make an additional point, read some of the themes or topics that came up in previous presentations. For example, and this was a question, maximum residue limits. And Dr. Joseph from PAHO had mentioned that there are codex deliberations on the issue of AMR. And Codex is the International Organization for Food Safety. As we speak, and as I sat down today, the National Codex Committee, we have the chair of the National Codex Committee, who is the head of the NCRA, who presented today. ECA facilitated her travel to one of the Codex Committee meetings on contaminants in food. And we have a WhatsApp group, and from yesterday they have been deliberating, and she has sent out messages to the group updating what's happening. She's getting advice from representatives from the Ministry of Health, representatives from the Bureau of Standards. In particular, the issue, it's so coincidental, of discussion or deliberation related to a drug promoter for growth in cattle, right? And just as Dr. Watson has emphasized, and it was a person from the Bureau of Standards who in the WhatsApp group said, we do not support drugs to promote growth in cattle in Jamaica, you know? So on the ground, there is an active group of persons from different entities, ministries of government, who sit on this Codex Committee, and they speak with one voice. Because the Codex Committee comprises representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Industry and Investment, who is the current chair, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Trade, private sector representatives, the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, and it's a body that takes this job very seriously. And so for the Permanent Secretary and the CTD, I just want to bat for Codex and encourage the resource allocation because it is a hard-working team. And as I said, these messages have been going on since yesterday as while I sat down in the meeting. But thank you very much. Just to let you know that we're all working together, as the theme says, for Antimicrobial Awareness Week.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Brandon. And I think the prevailing theme coming out of this symposium as we close is the importance of collaboration and personal responsibility. Antimicrobial Awareness Week will end tomorrow, World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, but of course the conversations must continue, and taking that personal responsibility is going to be critical in this entire exercise. I want to take this opportunity as we close to thank every single person who participated, those joining us online as well. We really do appreciate your attention to this very critical matter. And so at this time, I have the distinct pleasure of inviting our own permanent secretary, Mrs. Santia Bennett-Templo, really the CEO of the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce. She ensures that it is anchored and anchored well. Ladies and gentlemen, please make her welcome with closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. And although we say closing remarks, you're still going to have a presentation. The possibility of a short question and answer for any outstanding questions, and followed by a coffee break, I believe, so that conversations can continue as well. So let me recognize my Chief Technical Director, Michelle Parkins. Let me also recognize Dr. Serene Josephs. And the presentation that she made this morning was very intriguing and interesting. Thank you very much for being here and for spending the entire morning with us. I am going to then just greet all team members from the Portfolio Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce, all of the representatives from the Ministry of Agriculture who are here as well. There are other partner agencies that are here as well. I understand Case is here. So let me just not go into details, but just recognize everyone, persons online. Thank you for being here this morning. We have had an information-rich morning. There is just so much that persons will have learned. I'm happy to see that there's a recording, and there's a question of how we may use that in the future, because the wealth of information that was shared here today is very, very important. And as the last speaker spoke about antibiotics being used both in human and animals, I remember some few years ago, we had a little dog at the time, and she got ill, and we took her to the vet. And we got a prescription for Casey Templar, the dog's name was Casey, to go to the pharmacy and fill this prescription. And I remember being a little surprised at the time, because I was uninformed enough to believe that there were distinct medications for animals and distinct medications for humans, but obviously there is that crossover of medication as well. So let me say that it's been a privilege for me, and I'm sure all the persons here this morning, to learn about antimicrobial resistance and how each of our entity is responsible for implementing measures aimed at reducing pathogen, chemical, and pesticide residues in food production for human health. You would have heard from NCRA, National Compliance Regulatory Authority, Bureau of Standards Jamaica, well, not from Bureau of Standards, but they are aligned to the Bureau of Standards. JANAC is not here. That's another agency of ours which is involved in ensuring that the mechanism for standards in Jamaica is very, very strong. And you heard from our food storage prevention and infestation division. So this is an area in which the ministry is extremely involved, and we will continue to work steadfastly to ensure that the responsibilities that we have in terms of safeguarding the consumption, the consumers, Jamaica's trading reputation, and the application of standards and the monitoring to ensure that there is compliance continues. Doc, you mentioned that there is a plan, AMR plan, which is in development for Jamaica, and I am sure that there will be continuous work to have that completed and have that implemented. And we have heard from the partners as well of all of the various actions and initiatives that are underway. So Jamaica obviously is aware of this problem, working towards it. I remember speaking at this event as the Permanent Secretary of Health some 5 years ago. And of course, the learning and the information continues. So we joined the Ministry of Health and Wellness, Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, PAHO, IICA, and the FAO in partnership under the One Health approach to safeguard our domestic and international consumers from foodborne diseases and illnesses linked to unsafe food. As we continue the fight, the ministry has collaborated with PAHO to train lab analysts and technicians operating in government-owned laboratories to meet international testing standards. And I want to publicly thank PAHO for their support for this training of lab technicians and for the continuing support that PAHO gives. I know again from my time at Ministry of Health, the very close collaboration and working relationship between Jamaica, various entities, and especially the Ministry of Health and PAHO. And I want to again thank you for the support that you're giving in terms of laboratory training and as well. As Mr. Miller just said, collaboration, partnership, working together, personal responsibility. Obviously very important messages coming out of all of the presentations this morning, and we will carry that forward as well. Let me thank all of the presenters, excellent presentations all around, as I said, information rich, and we appreciate the collaboration of all partners here this morning. Thank you, and have a good rest of the afternoon.
Have you ever thought about how important your job is? In fact, when you really stop to think about it, your job is one of the most important jobs there is because you help feed people around the world. Each piece of fruit and vegetable that you harvest or pack with your hands can travel thousands of miles to feed all kinds of people, men and women, children, the elderly, and families just like yours. What about your own family? You probably wash their fruits and vegetables, or make sure they wash them before they eat them. And there are probably many other things you do to protect your family and make sure what they eat is safe and good for them. In a similar way, you also play a part in helping to make sure the food you harvest is safe for millions of other people. Though you've never met most of them, you touch their lives every day. You could even say that their health and safety is influenced by how well you do your job. As you can see, your job is very important. Food experts recommend that we all eat at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables every day to get the nutrition our bodies need to stay healthy. People seem to be listening to these important messages because they are eating more fresh fruits and vegetables than ever before. Increased consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables means that everyone involved in growing, harvesting, sorting, and packing produce is very important in assuring the safety of fresh fruits and vegetables. One way that fruits and vegetables can become unsafe is by carrying harmful germs. Although we can't see germs without a microscope, they are everywhere, even on us. Let's see how these microscopic germs can spread without anyone knowing it, even during harvest and packing. Suppose you get germs on your hands by doing some ordinary everyday thing, like going to the bathroom, or blowing your nose, or tying your shoes, or even picking something up off the floor. These germs or bacteria that are on your body, clothes, and hands can be transferred to fresh fruits and vegetables during harvesting and packing. As you can see, there are many different ways bacteria and other disease-causing organisms can move from place to place, causing fruits and vegetables to be contaminated. Contamination can occur when good hygienic practices are not followed during the harvesting and packing of fruits and vegetables. Showering daily, wearing clean clothes, and washing your hands often are examples of good hygienic practices. Practicing good personal hygiene is very important for your own health as well as for the safety of the fruits and vegetables you harvest and pack. Washing your hands can prevent you from getting sick.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry to have to cut it. I know it's very informative. We wanted to actually share with you something else, but this is quite as appropriate. And I know you've been here for a very long time, and some of you may not have had anything to eat earlier today, and we want to ensure that you're fed before you leave. So I'm going to invite you now at this time To join us on the outside, there are some refreshments prepared for you, so you can just partake of that. And as you do that, network, meet persons from the various organizations that are here, have the conversations, take business cards, man, so that you can continue that conversation about Antimicrobial Awareness Week. There's one thing also I'd like to mention, that our closing ceremony will actually be held tomorrow, and it will also be here. At that point, our State Minister, the Honorable Norman Dunn, Dr. Norman Dunn, will be present, and so I'll invite you as well to participate in that tomorrow at 10 a.m. as we cap World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. All right, so refreshments. Thank you again.
Overuse and misuse of antimicrobial drugs in humans and in agriculture speed up the development of antimicrobial resistance. As a result, the medicines we use to treat common infections are becoming less and less powerful, or even useless. How does antimicrobial resistance spread? Microbes that are resistant to antimicrobials can be found in people, animals, food, water and the environment. Antimicrobial resistant microbes can spread through the food chain and the environment, between people and animals, or from person to person. Antimicrobial resistance affects human health because drugs become less effective, leading to more severe illnesses, with an estimated 700,000 human deaths each year. Food supply and agriculture, because production losses lead to food insecurity, and because misuse results in unsafe or contaminated foods, and affects the environment, with soil and water polluted with drug residues and resistant microbes. What is needed? A global threat requires a global response. Bringing together all people and sectors to reduce the use of antimicrobials in humans and animals, and to use them selectively, prudently, and responsibly. A global threat requires a One Health approach, with all sectors working together. Veterinarians, prescribing medicines responsibly, and only after a proper diagnosis, and advising whenever possible alternatives to antimicrobials like vaccines. Farmers, through common and good farming practices, and a responsible use of quality antimicrobials, only on professional advice. Food producers, producing, handling, and marketing food under hygienic conditions in a proper and environmentally friendly way. From global commitment to local action, FAO supports national action plans involving all sectors to prevent the development of antimicrobial resistance by raising awareness, promoting best practices in food and agriculture, including aquaculture, developing capacity for surveillance and monitoring, and always making sure that rules for the safe use are respected. If we use antimicrobials in agriculture responsibly, we support sustainable food security and save lives.